And then I'll start letting folks in. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are, or good evening. Welcome. Excited to have you join us here. We are going to get started shortly. And I am going to hit some return here on my keyboard, submit, return, and give you some slides to look at. There you go, introduction slides and the PowerPoint slides. Welcome, everyone. All right, well, let's get started. Welcome to the Summer of Access webinar series. We're so happy to have you all here with us today. Today's session, Improving Accessibility in Online Learning, a DMAIC approach. We're going to get that right. Brought to you by L'Etoile Education and the Accessibility L&D community. We are going to just remind you of a few things with the Zoom meeting. Please stay muted unless you're speaking. We have the ability to use the chat raise hand feature for questions. The recording will be shared in the Accessibility L&D Slack community, and we also have live captions and transcripts as needed. There are webinar topics that you can explore for the August session on slide 3 of the intro slide. And then let's get right to it, why we're here today. So let me tell you about our presenters, Jared Spate and Rachel Franke. Jared Spate is an instructional design specialist at Mayo Clinic's Revenue Cycle Education and Continuous Improvement team. He holds a Master in Instructional Design and Technology and is a Section 508 trusted tester and a certified project manager professional. Jared holds the academic rank of Instructor of Healthcare Administration and is a Bronze Mayo Quality Fellow. Welcome, Jared. Rachel is an instructional design specialist at the Mayo Clinic with over 20 years in the training industry. She holds a graduate certificate in instructional design from UW Stout, is a Bronze Mayo Quality Fellow, and serves as an instructor of healthcare administration. Rachel focuses on building professional development programs that support staff and leadership growth. Please join me in welcoming them to our session today, and I will stop my share and turn it over.
Well, thank you, Nicole. Well, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to start off just with a question. Have you ever truly tried to navigate one of your courses end-to-end the way a learner with a disability might? Maybe only using a keyboard or a screen reader or adjusting for low vision? Well, I think that we had always believed that our courses were fairly accessible. But once we put ourselves in the shoes of learners with different needs and actually tested the content, we kind of realized that we weren't really hitting the mark as consistently as we thought. That testing of our courses kind of shifted our perspective and decided that we wanted to go beyond maybe patching things to really making better education. And around that same time, we're also looking to build our process improvement skills. So Mayo Clinic offers an excellent resource through our Quality Academy. We kind of saw this as an opportunity to connect both of these goals and tackle a silver quality project. So we used the structured approach from that silver quality project, the DMAIC process, to improve our accessibility in our courses. So this decision really helped us move from general good intentions towards accessibility to being able to be measurable and implement lasting changes in accessibility in the education that we deliver. So what we'd like to do today is just kind of walk you through that process and share what we learned along the way, hopefully offering some practical insight that you can take with you, whether you're just getting started or maybe looking to deepen your own accessibility efforts. All right, with that, I'll turn it over to Jared.
So as Rachel mentioned, we completed a silver quality project using the DMAIC process. We first defined our problem, then quantified it, determined roots, tested the solution before moving on to sustaining and scaling our work. And as many of you know, improving accessibility can feel overwhelming. There's so many areas to consider, and it feels like you need to fix everything at once. So what DMAIC did was it gave us a way to slow down, work smarter, and focus on building sustainable, effective processes. It also helped us gain leadership buy-in and align with broader organizational goals because we were speaking in terms of data and measurable outcomes, not just good intents. So today we'll walk you through the DMAIC process step by step, share the high-level work that we did, what we learned, and what you can take with you to support your own accessibility goals.
All right, well, I'm going to kick it off with the define phase, the first letter of DMAIC. So we started with the define phase, which is all about really laying that groundwork. And our first step was to clarify the gap in quality that we were looking at. So while accessibility really had always been a value for us, I don't think we had a clear sense of how consistent that value was reflected across our courses. And maybe you're kind of in those same shoes as well. We realized we needed to define what accessible actually meant within the context of our work, not just really in the terms of compliance, but in the terms of usability and inclusion. So we started by defining that gap, and then next, with the define phase, we set our scope, identified our stakeholders, and looked at outlining the impact and alignment that this project could have with our organizational goals, all during this define phase of the DMAIC process. So taking the structured approach really helped us kind of slow down, focus our efforts, and avoid like jumping straight into fixes, even though we kind of wanted to, kind of slow down a little bit. So before, avoided just jumping into fixes before really fully understanding the problem. So even if you're not using a DMAIC process formally, I think this space could be incredibly helpful, as it's your opportunity to really define where you want to start, what you want to improve, and maybe who would benefit. So just maybe in the chat throughout this presentation, I'm curious if others are on the process of accessibility, and maybe what roadblocks have you run into when trying to define or even start an accessibility improvement effort. Feel free to drop it in the chat, and we'll kind of circle through these responses as we go through the presentation today. And all right, so I'll turn it over to Jared as you're entering those in the chat. Jared's going to talk about our aim statement.
So as Rachel mentioned, the first thing that we had to do with this project was to actually define the problem. And the way that we did that was with an aim statement. And an aim statement is essentially a SMART goal. It's specific about what you want to accomplish. It's measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. And some aim statements even include a balancing measure to make sure you aren't making one problem worse while you're trying to solve another. So for our project, the goal was to ensure the courses in our chosen programs met essential accessibility criteria and delivered more inclusive learning experiences for all users. And that clear direction helped keep us grounded when we had to make decisions and helped us stay aligned with our original purpose. Having these measurable goals in writing made it easier to communicate our progress, celebrate small wins, and keep the project moving forward. So just whether you want to put it in the chat or just think about it, I'd invite you to think about if you had to make a one-sentence aim statement for your own accessibility efforts, what is the outcome that you would like to achieve?
As you're considering that, let me talk about another piece of the define phase. And that piece was connecting our project to Mayo Clinic's organizational values and strategic priorities. So we're able to clearly align our work with the values represented by what we call rich ties. And rich ties for Mayo stands for the respect, integrity, compassion, healing, teamwork, innovation, excellence, and stewardship, spelling out rich ties. So at its core, the accessibility really does reflect many of these principles. It's about respecting the diverse needs of our learners, upholding those ethical standards, and showing empathy, and ensuring everyone can really fully engage in the learning experience. We also tied our project to practical outcomes. Improving accessibility doesn't just reduce barriers, it can also help reduce regulatory risk, potential liability by ensuring we meet our legal standards. And even more than that, accessibility enhances the learner experience for all staff, not just those with a disability. And I think this commitment matters. Mayo Clinic has been recognized as a best place to work for diversity inclusion for 6 consecutive years. And I feel like projects like this can help reinforce that recognition and continue to move us towards even greater inclusivity.
So once we have figured out how to tie our project into organizational goals, the next step was to meet with various stakeholders and to identify them. These are individuals and groups who would be impacted by the project and whose support we needed to move it forward. That included our fellow instructional design specialists, SMEs, leaders, and of course, learners themselves. For each group, we had to consider their role, their concerns, their current level of support, whether they would be advocates, supporters, neutral, critics, or even blockers. And from there, we created a communication plan to engage each group in a way that addressed their perspective. When communicating with stakeholders, we came with a solution-focused approach. As many of you have probably experienced, simply saying this needs to be more accessible does not generate much action. You have to speak the language of your stakeholders. And for some, that means aligning accessibility with organizational values, like Rachel just shared. Sometimes it's making a legal case for compliance, or reduce liability for violations of the ADA or state laws like Minnesota's Human Rights Act. Other times it's just about raising awareness. Many leaders simply don't realize how many people are impacted. A 2023 study done by the Boston Consulting Group found that leaders estimated only 4 to 7% of their employees had a disability. But when the employees were asked directly, 25% of them identified as having a disability or condition that limited major life activity. And the CDC places that number even higher, nearly 1 in 3 adults in the US. When we met with our senior director, we weren't exactly sure how he would respond, but we were incredibly encouraged when he came back with this statement. No one should ever leave Mayo Clinic because we can't give them the tools they need to thrive in their role. We realize that that kind of leadership is rare, so we'd love to hear about some of the strategies you've used to gain support for accessibility in your own work. Feel free to throw those in the chat.
Okay. And I see the chat. We have one comment that the biggest challenge with accessibility improvements with accessibility is which improvements to make. There's so many things that we're not necessarily doing right and which ones to focus on. And that kind of leads me into the scope phase. So, oh, sorry, Jared, I think I might have stepped over.
You're good. So once we've defined the scope, sorry, I think I messed up there. Yeah.
Okay, there you go. We'll get back on track. Here we go. So, which leads me into the scope. And so what's DMAIC in the define phase also important is to really kind of set those clear and realistic strategies. And so from the beginning, again, we're trying to use the DMAIC process instead of trying to focusing on improving everything or trying to fix everything at once, just kind of trying to use a focused strategy. And I think that mindset really helped us stay grounded and avoid burnout, because I think it can be overwhelming when you're trying to look at all these different changes we have to make and we want to build with accessibility in mind. So what we did was we selected just 4 out of the 59 programs that we had total. And that helped give us a smaller selection to start with. And then those 4 programs had courses that had storyline files, RISE files, video-based content. So it gave us a good, strong sample to work with while keeping things manageable. The other thing we did is we have a team of 5 IDSs. And so Jared and I just kind of kept the scope small to just the 2 of us. And I think that helped us maybe avoid getting too overcomplicated in their decision making, and helped us be able to be nimble when we wanted to refine the process without maybe just too many voices in the mix. So from that start, with a small focus start, we were able to test and build a repeatable process template that we could then later scale out to other programs. And so again, kind of starting small gave us that clarity, control. And then, as you're starting on those smaller scale, you also kind of get those early wins that kind of help you build momentum. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaway from this phase was a smaller scope can give you the space to define success. And we learned so much as we went. And so we weren't trying to fix everything. We were trying to build, again, sustainability in our process. So even if you're maybe not doing a DMAIC process formally, which I think has a lot of benefits, but if you're kind of going through it a different way, because I know many of us out there are quiet accessibilizing, which I learned is kind of doing the work under the radar, because maybe you don't have your leadership support quite yet. We just want to acknowledge that you too can still define your scope, focus your energy, and create meaningful change by maybe just taking some of that principle of just starting small in your scope.
And once we had that scope, our next step was to quantify the problem and establish our baselines to measure actual improvement. So the way that we did this was we took those learning programs and we did a quick pass-fail accessibility audit for our courses, and we determined that 4 out of those 25 courses passed. Looking back, we may have learned more by tracking the number of errors instead of just doing a pass-fail. And had Storyline's accessibility checker been released at the time, we probably would have gone with that approach, but the way that we did this project still gave us something valuable, and that was structure and objectivity. It moved us away from subjective evaluations and gave us credible, concrete data that we could share with leadership and shifted the conversation from, yes, I think this is fine, to here is the percentage of courses that missed key accessibility criteria. So in the chat, we'd love to hear about any metrics that you use to track or wish you could when it comes to accessibility in your online learning.
Well, Jared mentioned that we audited those 4 programs consisting of 25 courses. And through the initial accessibility audit, we found that only 21 of the 25 courses had, we found that 21 of the 25 had failed. So, we weren't quite meeting the mark of accessibility from what we initially thought. And on a side note, based on the criteria that we later determined, none of our courses probably would have passed. So let me share with you, if you don't mind, just a list of some of the common accessibility issues we found when we were going through the course initial audit. Some of the biggest ones were inaccurate captions, contrast issues, focus order was not correct, or alt text was not set up, or we had automatically advancing slides. So those were some of the more common issues that we came across. And I think having that data kind of helped us prioritize which improvements we wanted to make first. It gave us a way to also, I think, build out leadership support, because as we were being able to show actual metrics of where we're at and where we wanted to be, that helped kind of prove the project that the gap was real, but solvable. And so for those of you working without maybe formal tools or a big team, I think maybe a good strategy would be to pick a few criteria items of accessibility. Maybe it's color contrast, maybe it's captioning or alt text, and just maybe evaluate a few courses and learn as you go. As we kind of started down this journey, I think you learn so much, and it helps you kind of be a little bit easier to pick out some of those areas that you are spotting those issues. So again, kind of a takeaway, you don't need perfect data to spot progress. You just need maybe a simple pass fail to help kind of take action or show support, metrics to help gain support. So after completing that measure phase, we kind of had all the information we knew of what was wrong or what we needed to address. But we wanted to learn more with the DMAIC process. It asks you to next analyze. So we'll go ahead to that next slide. And in the analyze phase, that's where you want to really get at the heart of the problem. So this is your why statement, like, why are we having gaps? Which of these causes is causing the biggest impact? And I kind of really enjoyed this phase of it, getting into the details of why maybe we didn't have accessibility, even though we thought we were kind of working with it in mind. And so we used 2 tools to help us dive deeper. We used a fishbone diagram to identify those broad categories of contributing factors. And then a second tool we used was a causal tree. And that causal tree, which Jared will show you in a second, was really great on unpacking our issues and determining what was really driving those gaps. And I think this phase of DMAIC kind of helps us from just solution jumping, thinking, well, we know why it is, it's because X, Y, and Z. It kind of forced us to dig deeper and actually look at maybe, like, were these actual reasons or not? And I think some of the reasons that we did come across were what we thought, but some of them weren't exactly what we thought either. So getting at the root cause is going to help you as well kind of determine what you need to move forward on.
So Rachel and I had a meeting with our supervisor and our senior manager, and we started brainstorming issues that we believed led to our problem. And the emphasis in this process is identifying process issues and not pointing fingers or assigning blame to the people who were involved. The focus is on what is causing it, not who. And like Rachel mentioned, this was something that I enjoyed, but I can definitely see how this could go south if you did not have this built-in respect for the people that you're working on the project with. And I'm sure that many of the issues that we've identified on this fishbone diagram look familiar to you. So if there are any that you relate to or ones that you feel we left out, we would love to hear about those. There might be some that we missed. And we know that project demands, especially when tight timelines are involved, have a large impact on e-learning. We do have that on our chart. So once we came up with this brainstorm list, we kind of grouped them into categories, and these were the causes that we were looking at for why our courses were not accessible. The next step was our causal tree, and if I get through this presentation without calling it a casual tree, that will be a win for me. But we built this and we started going through and grouping issues by asking why until we could find these root causes. One of our root paths can be seen here. We started with not knowing the specific needs of our learners and determined that we didn't really have an explicit open pathway of communication between our team and disabled learners or learners in general when talking about what they need. We did have a report and issue form, but nothing that was specific to accommodations. So while this didn't become a central focus of our project, we did address it in the later stages as a broader part of our improvement efforts. You can see kind of a zoomed out picture of our causal tree with a focus here on what we do believe the root causes were. So after we questioned everything and we created our causal tree, the big question was, what were our core driving issues? Because as somebody has mentioned in the chat, it's overwhelming and you can't fix everything at once. So we focused on two big root causes. One was the lack of a formal accessibility review process, and another was limited tool-specific training for course authors. So that's where we knew we could make the biggest and most sustainable difference.
So that leads us then, as we conclude the analyze phase, into the improve phase. And that's where we started putting into our solutions and testing our solutions. So now that we had a clear kind of picture of what our root cause is, it's time to make those practical changes. And we wanted to do things that were maybe not too complicated, were scalable, sustainable for our team. So we focused on building tools and resources that we could use immediately, and maybe some of these tools be something that you can maybe use too. The first thing that we looked at was installing and learning the basics of NVDA. I can tell you that was a real interesting experience for me starting off, and as many of you maybe who have or haven't used it, I certainly suggest going through that. And also bookmarking the WebAIMS contrast checker, because I think, you think, well, that seems like it's a pretty good contrast, but when you actually put the numbers to it and see, it really does give you obviously a much better indication of if it's accessible or not. Also, as Jared mentioned earlier, we ended up writing an accessibility statement to be included in each of our courses. And by having that accessibility statement, we also provided an anonymous feedback form, and that can help really communicate between us and our learners. So if there were still needs that we weren't meeting, they had a way to communicate that to us. And then kind of our biggest item that was a great takeaway was creating an accessibility checklist for our review process. So those are some of the tools that we came, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about a review checklist, but if you wouldn't mind sharing in the chat, if there's any tools or resources that have really helped you move forward with accessibility, I'd love for our group to learn from those as well and share those out. So I'm going to go through a couple revisions of our checklist. So Jared, if you want to move ahead. So this was kind of the first version of our review checklist. You notice that we have the WCAG guideline number along with the description and pass fail. So we were able to kind of go through our course, evaluate it, and indicate if it had passed or failed each of those guidelines. But we also created a resource guide that kind of pulled out those guidelines. We also used to document our lessons learned and our own best practices. So we had these two different documents. And so in our second revision, we thought, hey, why not kind of link these guidelines along with our resource documents? So that first picture on top shows you a snippet of our checklist, and there's hyperlinks for that section that would bring you to kind of an Excel document, would bring you to a different tab. And then we have some resources available. So as you're looking at those guidelines and thinking, well, what exactly does that mean? Because there's quite a few guidelines, and you don't kind of memorize them off the top, at the first run. So having that resource was definitely a nice visual to bounce back and forth as you're doing accessibility review. So then we went to our third revision and we switched, instead of just having a pass-fail option, we thought, well, it'd be nice to be able to track if it passed, if it needs repair, if we need to repair it, then was it repaired? And then NA, like maybe that one just wasn't present in the course. And what was great about that then, I think, was as maybe I reviewed Jared's and marked something as needs repair, and I was like, I'm not sure how he's going to repair this, but it needs to be repaired, right? So as he went back and repaired an item in the course, he would leave a note in that white space to the right of it, kind of tracking what the repair was made. So it also gave us an opportunity to kind of learn back and forth between each other and have that also historically documented. And then our third revision, we just move forward one more slide, Jared, and then I'll show that fourth one. We decided that, okay, so we've got an e-learning has quite a few more items, but a video was short. So instead of having to click through NA, we were able to make just a separate tab. And so we have one checklist for our videos and then one checklist for our courses. And so I think that really helped us kind of create this archive. We'd save each one for future updates, a record of what we learned. And then also now, as we bring this forward to the rest of our team, we now have this consistent approach of what we're looking for within our accessibility during our review process. So we anticipate incorporating this accessibility checklist into our final quality assurance review once just right before a course is published to double check this. All right.
And one of the things that Rachel mentioned is our accessibility statement and feedback form. So what we started doing was including at the beginning of every course an accessibility statement that gave learners kind of an overview of what we were aiming to do by defining that we were aiming for WCAG 2.2 level AA. And we ensured that they also had a link that was available to a survey so that they could anonymously report things that maybe we didn't catch that may not even be a part of the AA criteria, but we have staff who need it. So this was designed to create, that open flow of communication that we kind of alluded to earlier. And again, these statements and forms are included at the very beginning. So in our templates for RISE, we created an expandable accordion block at the very top. So people who don't want to read the accessibility statement can continue right to the content, and people who do can. And then in Storyline, we have an accessibility icon that when selected will reveal that as well. So it communicates that this is something that we are aiming for. We're hoping to take these small steps, and we anticipate that it will build trust and open those lines of communication. And speaking of templates, we didn't talk about this much earlier, but the balancing measure for our project is that we wouldn't fall behind on other projects while we were working on fixing these existing courses. And one way that we've been able to do that is through the creation of accessible templates that we have stored in our team's library. And these templates help provide an ongoing return on investment for the project, not just by making sure that these courses are accessible to all of our staff, but by providing time savings on future course builds. And if you use my favorite method of instructional design math, every hour that we save, it takes you one step closer to eventually this project not taking any hours whatsoever.
So as Jared mentioned, we utilize technology, and sometimes, however, there were some issues identified, or maybe the tools themselves are falling short. And I think it's great to make sure you're advocating as well with collaborating externally. So I think one of the ways we did that was also providing feedback during the beta testing of Storyline's accessibility checker. And I'm not sure, Jared, you mentioned this or not, but at the beginning of this project, we didn't have access to it, but it did kind of come through as we were working on the project. And wow, what a great tool to use. We also advocated for improved accessibility features with Storyline and RISE, which is getting in touch with the vendors and sending feedback. So I think that's great. Another thing that we did is we have a tool called Kaltura, and it was our captioning tool for our video exchange library. Well, we found that the captions would just like stop after 5 minutes. And no one really noticed that until we started working on this accessibility project. So we brought to like this bug that was occurring. And, so this was impacting other divisions within Mayo and also other organizations. So the vendor was able to correct that and fix it. So just, again, kind of advocating and speaking up and sharing feedback with vendors, I think is also a great thing that we came across through this project. So I think, one key takeaway from that too is, that ripple effect that you can make by making a difference in your organization. You can also maybe make a bigger difference by communicating out and helping others.
So the last step of the DMAIC process is the control phase, and we're not quite there yet. We have 2 courses that are currently in progress, and once we're done with those, we're going to move on to this control phase. But once we have finished those and we move to this part of the project, the focus is on sustaining our progress and planning for scale. This project will not mean much of anything if we create these changes and then 6 months from now, we're back to what we were doing before. So these are the areas that we're going to focus on. One is expanding thoughtfully. This was a 6-month project so far that Rachel and I have been going through. And we know that when we bring the other instructional designers on, it would be overwhelming to give them everything at once. So we're going to plan to carefully bring them into the process using peer support and hands-on learning to build their confidence to get them used to the tools that we've been developing. Part of that will be professional development training sessions to share the tools, what we learned. Our main goal is to shift left because the earlier you do the accessibility, and it becomes a natural part of the design work, the easier it is, instead of just doing it as a separate task to complete after the fact. And Nicole, I think you mentioned in the chat, sometimes it's just easier to archive and rebuild because trying to remediate accessibility issues afterward takes a lot more work than just building it from an accessible universal design to begin with. We're also going to standardize the review process, and our accessibility checklist and reference document will be a part of that. It's not just a QA tool. Those resources help it become a teaching tool that reinforce good habits during development. There's going to be debriefs where we share a summary of our progress, lessons learned, and future plans with the leadership. And this step is critical to reinforce organizational alignment and build accountability for ongoing work. And lastly, staying ahead of tech changes. So tools and standards will keep evolving. So we're committed to tracking updates such as the release of Storyline's built-in accessibility checker. We had beta access to that, so we were able to kind of get ahead in our project because of that extra 2 weeks, I believe it was, where we were able to use that tool and even provide feedback to Articulate about what we liked about it.
So closing thoughts. I think that Jared and I both would agree that the DMAIC process really helped us to improve accessibility in our workplace. And going through the DMAIC process made a real difference of how we approach the accessibility. That structure it gave us, it helps us stay focused, and it turned such a big project and complex challenge into these manageable steps. So for us, and then this project ultimately just became a mindset shift as well. Now we could have just addressed the accessibility like on its own. We could have just said, okay, we're going to start working through it and making changes and making our courses accessible. But I don't think we'd be in the same spot we are in the 6 months that we dedicated to this project. So I think using DMAIC, it helped us really create these clear, sustainable tools that we can easily scale with the rest of our team by D, defining the real problem, not just what was visible, M, measuring what mattered. So we could make those data-driven decisions. As Jared showed, we had the nice Excel sheet that gave us the measurements that we needed. They analyze the root causes instead of just jumping to those surface level fixes. They improve, creating these practical, scalable ways to improve our accessibility. And as Jared mentioned, now we're in the control process or control phase of the process. And so we're going to work on making sure that we embed the accessibility and it continues to evolve with our group. So I want to say, even if you decide like maybe DMAIC seems a little overwhelming for your team or for yourself, I mean, there's certainly tools out there to help you work through it. But if you want to just take some of these lessons learned, I think start small with one course for one improvement. Measure some of those key things that would really impact your learners' experience. Do maybe dive deep into the root causes behind common accessibility issues. I think one thing that really struck me is Jared and I both kind of had this impression that, maybe we wouldn't have the leadership support because it does seem like it takes more time and effort. But as we ask these questions, Jared mentioned the quote at the beginning from our director that they were completely behind this project, which was great to see. And maybe we should have expected it. But also creating these tools, even simple ones that can help you and others take action. So as you look at this, share what you learn through accessibility and keep it part of the conversation as you make some wins or some changes on your team. So with that being said, I just really, truly want to thank you for being here and for your commitment to creating that better, more accessible learning for all. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Nicole.
Rachel and Jared, thank you so much. I can just, I think there's a lot of wheels turning right now and thinking happening from our participants and lots of great takeaways. I see a lot of, I'm going to steal this, borrow it, however you need to repurpose it. Excellent thought. Excellent share, I'll just say. So any other follow-up questions for Rachel or Jared? And I am curious, this approach, is this specific to the Mayo? So you talked a little bit about that. Is it the Mayo Clinic's approach? Is it copyrighted? Is this something others can use?
So DMAIC is a Lean Six Sigma technique. Because Mayo Clinic is a university hospital, is education focused. We do have a quality academy that teaches people how to go through this process. So this is the approach that they use. It's not, if there's no ownership of Mayo Clinic over the process.
Great. Thank you. Figured I'd ask. I'm familiar with fishbone diagrams and the way that you approach this. Love to see a good fishbone root cause analysis. Those of us who would come maybe from the education space as well have used these in the past. And so helpful to know that if you'd like to steal that approach, you can. It's usable. So, all right. Any other questions for Jared and Rachel? Thank you. Lots of thank yous. We'll follow up. Yeah, this is awesome. We also follow this in our organization. All right, everyone. If there's no further questions, there's ability to reach out to Jared and Rachel. They're both on LinkedIn. They're in the intro slides. And so just follow them and we'll be really curious to hear how things progress. So let us know, post about it, share about it. Excellent job. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.